From a disturbing discovery in a creepy Airbnb to a potential alien skeleton found on Mars, here are 10 of the scariest and most unbelievable recent discoveries. Number 10. The Bishop's Fetus. In 1679, Bishop Peter Winstrup died. Today, he's one of the best preserved corpses from the 1600s. But when researchers recently decided to investigate the man's body, they found something shocking hidden beneath his calves. For the past 5 years, scientists have been struggling to make sense of why they discovered a fetus buried with the famous bishop. DNA analysis from 2021 has revealed that the fetus was probably the bishop's grandson, and that the child was likely stillborn and died during a miscarriage around 6 months into the pregnancy. But why was he buried with his grandfather? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Bishop Peter Winstrup was born in 1605 and lived to be 74 years old. He was a theologian and responsible for convincing the King of Sweden to open a new university in Lund, which is still in operation today. When he was buried, his body was dried out and left inside its crypt in the Cathedral of Lund. The dry and cold conditions of the crypt helped to preserve his body perfectly. CT scans showed that he still had individual organs preserved inside of him. As for the mysterious fetus buried under his feet, DNA tests proved the unborn child shared 25% of its genetic material with the bishop. This means the bishop was either the child's grandparent, its half-brother, or even its uncle. Historians believe it makes the most sense if the fetus had been his grandson. However, nobody has any idea why the child would have been buried at the bishop's feet. Perhaps the child was illegitimate and needed to be hidden away to avoid embarrassment. Number 9. Atomic waste. In the Marshall Islands, there's a concrete dome jammed full of nuclear waste, and it's currently under threat by rising sea levels. This thing has been dubbed the Tomb, and it apparently holds tons of radioactive debris from atomic bomb tests carried out by the United States during the Cold War. Between 1946 and 1958, at least 40 nuclear weapon tests were done in the Pacific. This includes a bomb test that was done on Runit Island. The crater left behind from the bomb in Runit Island was then converted into a nuclear waste storage facility by the Defense Nuclear Agency. When the testing was done, a giant concrete slab was installed over the toxic waste about 377 feet. At the time, it seemed like a perfectly good idea, but now things are looking rocky. According to the BBC, there are concerns that the dome structure is currently deteriorating and could be hit hard by a sudden rise in the sea level. If the dome were to be damaged and the toxic waste were to leak out, it would be a massive biological disaster. The staggering amount of nuclear garbage would pour directly into the ocean, having serious consequences for marine life. Nobody knows how this mess is going to be resolved, and the dangers of this giant atomic waste dump are currently being investigated by the United States. But as of now, nothing's been resolved. This is one scary time bomb just waiting to go off. Number 8. Alien skeletons on Mars. The skeleton of what appears to be an alien on the surface of Mars is shocking people all over the world. There have been strange shapes discovered on Mars before, but nothing that compares to the photographs recently taken of the red planet that appear to show an actual humanoid skeleton. This find was made inside of a picture uploaded by NASA, taken by the Mars Curiosity rover. So far as anyone can tell, these bones are the fossilized remains of some kind of creature. Nobody knows what kind of creature it might be, but they're definitely scary bones, and they've prompted people to speculate that we're closer than ever to finding life beyond our planet. Unfortunately, NASA hasn't made any comments about the potential alien skeleton. They would probably blame the shape of the skeleton on dust or some optical illusion. The only way we'll know for sure if these bones belong to a race of creatures that once thrived on Mars will be to go there and check for ourselves. But that won't be happening anytime soon. And so all we have now is speculation and a photo of some dusty potential bones. Number 7. Too many bees. When George Montgomery moved into his new home, he didn't expect to make an extremely terrifying discovery. George soon found that the house he'd moved into was in fact full of bees. George recently told CNN that the bees inside of his house were so loud that he could hear them slapping against the insides of his walls. Apparently, George had missed the bees when making an offer on the new home. Now that he was finally living in it, spending a whole bunch of money on bee removal seemed like a nightmare. George ended up living with the bees for nearly 2 years. They buzzed through the brick foundation, sifted through the floor joists, and were pretty much a part of every single room in his house. Finally, George decided that living with bees wasn't worth it after getting attacked by a swarm of angry buzzers while trying to mow his lawn. George was forced to call a local bee removal company, and according to them, George had been living with at least 100,000 bees inside of his home. To put that in perspective, a typical colony only has between 10,000 and 80,000 bees. This means George had been living in one of the most bee-infested houses in history. Have you ever had bees or another colony of invasive insects living in your house? Did you have to call the exterminator? What happened? Tell me about it in the comments section down below. Then remember to subscribe on American Eye if you haven't already for more amazing videos just like this one. Number 6. Airbnb horror. Speaking of terrifying houses, an unnamed man staying at an Airbnb in Virginia recently had the trip of a lifetime. What was supposed to be an ordinary stay in an Airbnb turned into a scary nightmare after the man discovered a secret room hidden behind an air vent. This person never identified himself, but he did upload the video of this disturbing discovery online. He told the internet that his first clue something was wrong was when he checked into the rental and the owner seemed surprised that he wasn't a woman. Things then got stranger when he heard a noise in the middle of the night and felt a weird sensation as though he were being watched. It was so creepy that he could hardly sleep through the night. But the real creepiness came the next morning when he discovered a dark room attached to the room he had slept in, separated by a thin air grate. Of course, there was no way to verify what exactly the creepy room was being used for, but I think we all have a pretty good idea. A spokesperson for Airbnb said that they could not verify any details of the incident, but that they take privacy violations very seriously. Basically, they're not going to do anything about the creepy person peering through the grate, and let's get real. If this story is true, someone was definitely looking at this man while he slept. Number 5. Terrifying Egyptian mummy. Archaeologists in Egypt discovered a horrifying mummy that they believed to be just about 4,000 years old. This happened while they were excavating a burial chamber. But this scary mummy is actually baffling some experts in the archaeological community. The discovery was made thanks to archaeologist Dr. Martina Bardanova, near the ancient city of Aswan. Martina led a team of Spanish researchers into the new tomb where they discovered the coffin of an unknown mummy. The coffin was old and creepy, and it got creepier still when they opened the lid to discover the remains of an old woman. She was hardly mummified. In fact, the woman wasn't much more than bones wrapped in a mysterious black fabric, kind of like a vampire. The archaeologists called in a bone expert, Dr. Miguel Cecilio Botella Lopez, to find out more about who the skeleton belonged to. The bone expert deducted that the woman was over 70 years old before she was buried. Here's why that's so strange. People in ancient Egypt typically did not grow old. There were high infant death rates, there was a constant risk of infection or disease, and the average life expectancy was only about 25. A huge percentage of women even died during childbirth. For someone to grow 70 years old back in ancient Egypt is like someone today growing to be 200. As of right now, nobody knows just how exactly this old woman survived so long, or why she was buried in a creepy tomb. Number 4. Israel Cave of Horror. Archaeologists working in Israel have stumbled upon a creepy new discovery inside of what they're calling the Cave of Horror. For the first time in 60 years, a new fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls was discovered. Excavations were carried out by the Israel Antiquities Authority, who found the new scroll, which is written in Greek. The scroll is a missing part of the Book of the 12 Minor Prophets, containing several verses from Zechariah and Nahum. But that's not all archaeologists found inside of the Cave of Horror. They also discovered the skeletons of men, women, and children. Those more morbid discoveries were actually made in the 1950s when the cave was first explored. Historians now believe that the skeletons were part of a Jewish rebellion against the Roman Empire that happened between 132 and 136. These people hid inside of the cave and eventually died from starvation, seeing as the only way out of the cave was to climb 200 feet, 60 meters up a sheer cliff. Even archaeologists today had a difficult time rappelling down into the caves, but it was worth it. Along with a new fragment of Dead Sea Scroll, they found Jewish coins, ancient arrowheads, a 10,500-year-old basket, and a partly mummified skeleton belonging to a child, dating back to 6,000 years ago. The child's body had been preserved because of the dry air inside the cave. He was found with hair, skin, and tendons still preserved, even 6,000 years later. Number 3. The Spider Mom. While mowing her lawn, a woman discovered something absolutely terrifying. She found a giant mother spider with hundreds of little baby spiders clinging to her back. This maternal spider was minding her own business in the garden, trying not to get run over by the lawnmower. She had an entire brood of tiny baby spiders clinging to her back, making her look especially freaky. And where did this happen? Of course it was in Australia. Where else would such a giant and horrifying spider be living? The woman bravely picked up the spider and placed it out of harm's way, and then went back to mowing her lawn. It turned out that she had discovered a massive wolf spider. According to the Australian Museum, wolf spiders are some of the only arachnids to show a large degree of paternal care. This explains why the mother was helping all her young by carrying them around on her back. Still, the woman who found the giant spider in her garden was extremely lucky. Wolf spiders are not considered to be aggressive, though they will bite if provoked and especially if defending their babies. They also have a venomous bite that should be considered dangerous to humans. Number 2. Valley of Death. Archaeologists working in Poland recently exhumed the remains of partisans of World War II from a killing site that has been dubbed the Polish Valley of Death. This archaeological discovery was made near the small town of Chojnice, where violent military and police forces from Germany murdered as many as 2,000 people during the Second World War. It wasn't until just recently that archaeologists were able to excavate the remains of Polish nationals who had been imprisoned by the Gestapo secret police back in the mid-1940s. The results of the excavations were terrifying. From what historical records tell us, most of the dead had been arrested between 1944 and 1945, and towards the end of the war, most of them were executed. They were held at a prison before the advancing Red Army forced the Germans to evacuate and leave behind a trail of death and misery. Excavations were done in fields and farms where many of the bodies had been carelessly dumped. Along with bones, archaeologists found burnt human remains and even a dozen or so German handgun shells. All the bodies that are being exhumed by the archaeologists will be put to rest at the cemetery of the victims of Nazi crimes in Chojnica. Number 1. Successful cloning. In absolutely terrifying news, scientists in China recently cloned monkeys successfully. This may seem like good news, but it's a pretty horrifying discovery. The reason for this is that according to the global news, they're now closer to being able to successfully clone humans. Of course, scientists have been cloning animals ever since 1996 when they cloned the famous sheep named Dolly. They have since cloned dogs and cats, pigs, and cows. They've even created special human embryos using cloning methods. But until now, they were unable to clone primates. But thanks to new discoveries in science, now they can. A scientist from the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Shanghai recently told news reporters that the barrier of cloning primate species has been breached. This means scientists believe they can clone pretty much anything, including you or me. The monkeys that were cloned were macaques named Zhongzhong and Huahua. It took a lot of effort. Scientists implanted almost 80 embryos and worked with over 127 eggs just to produce the 2 successful babies. And even though these scientists claim that they have no intention of cloning humans, we all know it's bound to happen sooner or later. And to be honest, that is a scary thought. Would you ever make a clone of yourself? Let me know which discovery freaked you out the most in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more awesome videos like this one. If you could have yourself cloned at no cost whatsoever, would you do it?